Hello everybody, welcome back to the studio. Got a dog toy on the bench. We don't need that. Another wallet coming in from the community. Deanne from DS Leather Goods put out on Instagram that he was looking for people to test his pattern for a new wallet called the Vice Admiral wallet. That's a pretty epic name. So I offered to help out to test the pattern. So we're supposed to follow the instructions, read through these, make sure they make sense, test out the pattern, see if there's anything that doesn't work, and then give him that feedback. Deanne has given me a lot of really good tips on edge polishing. So I thought in this video, I'm actually going to focus on that and show you exactly my process as it is today, June 6th, 2022, how I edge polish all of my wallets. Okay, so we've got everything trimmed out. I've polished the top edge of these three pockets. Put those aside. I've skived down the 1T pocket, and I'm just about to get everything lined up to stitch this pocket in. And I wanted to make a note about how to make sure these pockets always are going to line up correctly with your stitching chisel. So because I don't have an iron that matches the exact TPI of the pattern, I want to make sure that everything's going to line up when I actually punch it. So putting this onto the template, my 3.0 matches most closely. So I've made my stitch line on my interior piece, and I'm just going to go up from the corner as if this was all assembled, as if my pockets were already in here. I would punch as normal. I'm going to pre-mark everything so that I know where my last stitch is going to hit. So lining up my bottom corner, I'll mark in just a little bit, line up that last hole, mark it again, and then mark all the way up until I get close to where my pattern says that my pocket should end. There's Kona barking at the neighbors. So this is lined up here. This looks like it's going to hit right at the bottom of that pocket. So I'll go one more, and then you can see this last hole matches more or less with my perking iron right there. So now I'll do the same thing on the other side until I get my last 2 points. Then I can come in with my top pocket, and knowing that I want to end up right there, this then is the placement of that pocket. The problem though is that if I remove this one, I'll illustrate this because it's hard to line it up and show it on camera. This pocket right here, this pocket lands exactly in the middle of one of my stitch holes. So obviously that's not going to work. So what I do is line it up so my top pocket is going to line up with the last stitch hole. Put my front pocket in place. Now I'm going to remove this. Now I'm going to look at the closest stitch hole, which is right here, and bump up my pattern so it hits the bottom of that stitch. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitch holes. So So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to line up my bottom pocket, my front pocket first. Take my awl, wherever my awl is, put a little mark. Put that little mark. That's where I know my front pocket lines up. So now, if I put this pocket on top of that mark, I can see this last hole is just barely covered by this pocket. So instead of making sure it lines up exactly, I can just take a single tooth iron and just bump that last stitch up by, that's not even a half, that's barely half a millimeter. But it does mean that all along here my stitch will be perfect, and then this last one that wraps over the top of that pocket will be slightly longer, nothing you're ever going to notice. But the top of this pocket won't get cut because my iron isn't landing right on the edge. That's a bit long-winded, but hopefully that made sense. Glued up, stitched, or it's not stitched, punched. You can see that top stitch lands right above the pocket. And the corner, get this thing to focus, lands right at the corner. So that's a benefit of pre-marking so that your pockets line up properly, and then the spacing right in there worked out as well. So now I'm going to stitch this. I got the little flap pocket done. I'll stitch this. Okay, so while it's all done, it's all stitched up, ready for these edges to be finished off. But I'm just going to focus on one side for the demonstration of this video. So step one, you're going to want to make sure your edges are nice and flat to start. So that's either by using your trim allowance and then cutting that edge flush, or you could use a tiny little block plane to shave down that edge. Now it's just taking very fine dusting off, but it makes sure that edge is nice and smooth to start. And that's even before sandpaper. I've just started using this plane and it helps a lot. It really speeds up the process because you're starting from a nice flat, clean surface. So the grits of sandpaper that I use, 220, 400, 600, 1500. Those are the 4 grits that get me to a polished edge before the final step, which is using the wax canvas cloth and then a polishing block. I don't use any of those until I've done these 4 steps. Deanne, DS Leather Goods, recently gave me a tip that made a big difference, and that was wet sanding between each coat. So I start with 220, Tokonole, and then 220 again. 400, Tokonole, 400, wet sand. 600, Tokonole, wet sand with 600. 1500, Tokonole, wet sand with 1500. It sounds like a lot, but it actually makes, it's actually faster. Before I was doing, I think I was about doing, I didn't go up to 1500, and I didn't wet sand between each. So I was doing 220, 400, 600 Tokonole canvas. And that I actually found took me longer to get an edge because I spent more time with the canvas cloth. Whereas wet sanding between each and then adding in this 1500 gets the edge almost polished already, and then adding the wax just brings it to that next level along with the little polishing block. The grit of this paper is equivalent to about 8,000. So one thing I find about these types of tutorials is that it's great for me to explain to you the different grits that I use, obviously very important. It's another thing if you were standing over my shoulder and you could see what was happening to this edge as I worked through each grit. So I've got my phone set up here, and as I work through here, I'm going to attempt to show you what this edge looks like as I sand down that grit. But when do you know you're actually done sanding that grit? What is that point? It's a little bit subjective, but there is a definitive point when you know you've gotten those fibers sanded down to that grit. But for me, this edge will change color to whatever this looks like after I take those first few passes. That's when I'm done. That's when I stop. So starting with 220, let's see what this edge looks like to start. Let's zoom in here. So it's nice and flat, dull, and there's still lots of roughness on here. So I'm going to leave this in real time so you can see how long I spend on this grit. Okay, so here we go. So 220. I was just working one direction to start. And right out of the gate, I can see that the blue leather, the blue butero, is almost done. So it's completely changed color. It's now nice and it's super light. And I'll show you in a second here, once I'm done on this edge. So the angle that I was sanding at right there got all of that blue removed. So I think I'm slightly too angled this way. So I'm going to tilt my sandpaper up so that I'm hitting the brown leather. And now I can see this, all the dark spots are going away. Everything's starting to get a nice even color to it. Now I do notice the middle isn't getting hit, which means my sides are still a little bit high. So I'm kind of working across the grain. It looks like I'm going forward, but I'm actually going on an angle. Let's zoom in here a little bit. See if this will help. So this edge up here, you still got a bunch of gunk. I think there's actually some, there's some glue right up on the edge here. So I'm just gonna take this, I don't remember what they call this, some sort of rubber. And you can get, a bunch of places sell it, crepe rubber, crepe rubber. It really helps to get rid of any excess glue, and I think that's what's holding me up right here. So I can still see a little bit of the dark part right in the seam right there. So I'm going to keep sanding until I don't see any of those dark spots. Now I'm regularly changing areas on this sandpaper as it gets used up, so that I'm always working with a fresh edge. One thing you can do as well, I like sometimes using a small dowel that I cut to about the size of the sandpaper, and I wrap the sandpaper around that. And then that gives me a nice flat edge to work with. Sometimes that's better than wrapping the sandpaper around your fingers. Actually, that helped a lot to get that edge right there. So this is when I would call this step done. Now, one reason I'm this particular at this stage is because if I'm diligent here, I'll never have to go back. I'll never get to a point where I'm up to 600 and it's like, oh, I still see some marks there. No, I've gone. It hasn't happened since I've started doing this method, being this discerning about sanding. So let's see side by side. Okay, so there's my sanded edge. That's my rough edge. So do you see the color difference? From the blue to the blue and the brown to the brown. So now I'm ready to hit this edge with Tokonole. Clean it off, make sure it's off of the face of the leather, and then back with our 220, and then wet sand it. So actually, before we do that, so there's the edges nice and dark. I'm just gonna sand this top part and then show you what it looks like when I'm done sanding versus the bottom part, which I haven't done. Again, I'm hoping that this is gonna provide context to this clip being uncut. Well, uncut as in no additional time has passed. I haven't done anything to this edge since we started, outside of what you've seen recorded. So hopefully this will provide a bit of context to how long this takes and just the effort and detail that goes into looking at that edge to determine when you're done. Okay. So there you go. So now, so this is done. There you go. So this part's done and this part isn't. So this still has the Tokonole on it. This has now been sanded away. So you can see that edge is nice and even. I don't have any little dark spots on here that look like this. That's how I know I'm done. So now we'll just keep going. And that looks good. So we'll get a close up here. So there's the edge. That's after wet sanding 220 and Tokonole. So there's no shine to it, it's still matte, but the surface is nice and even. So now we're going to move on to 400. So exact same process as last time. Side note, this is not actually wet, dry sandpaper. This is just dry. So I do notice a difference. This does get clogged up a lot quicker, but I have a lot of this still, so I just end up using a bit more of it than I would if this is proper wet 400. It's now just same process. So I'm looking at the color, and trying to determine when it has changed enough where I've sanded this edge to 400. And I find that this grit, the color doesn't change as much when dry sanding, but the texture of the fibers gets finer. It's still a matte finish at 400. Oh, so this is also using vegetable tan Butera leather. If you're trying to do this on chrome tan or shell, it could be very, very different. Just a little context for the type of leather I'm sanding down here. This is also very high quality leather. If you have a cheap vegetable tan, it may be very, very loose fibers in here. Butera has nice tight fibers, so it sands really well and really easily. So that's good. So this feels super smooth now, and it's starting to get a bit of a shine. So you can see the 400. That edge is starting. There you go. It's starting to get a bit of a shine. So there you go. That's 2 grits. 220 up to 400 dry. So now we put the Tokonole on. We'll see how this looks after 400 wet sand. I used to use a 50-50 mixture of water and Tokonole. This I now only use at the very end. I want to try this with 2/3 Tokonole and 1/3 water, because this little bottle and squeeze bottle is super convenient. Rather than having to dip the finger in here, and sometimes you don't get enough and you got to keep going back. This is the process is kind of still going and still perfecting it. And I don't like using my finger for this just because it's not consistent each time, whereas that little squeeze bottle, you swipe it, the same amount comes out. It's nice and quick and efficient. So 400 wet. Now we're just looking for that edge to change color, and that's when I know I'm done sanding. See it here. You can see that lighter bit, that's where I've sanded. Actually, here we go. Here's a good example. You can see the dark strip in the middle. Right down the middle there. So that's going to come cross grain until that lightens up. And if you have a nice flat surface, this should start to become a pretty quick process when you get through these grits. Because the surface is nice and flat, the sandpaper is going to hit it evenly. As you swipe down it, it's going to hit all of the fibers all at once. Whereas if your surface is kind of undulating or the middle dips out, it's got a big bump, you're going to hit other areas first. So this is actually done fairly quickly because I was able to flatten it, 1 with the plane and then 2 with the 220. This is one thing I find the plane, I think I was way off. So yeah, this is where the dry sandpaper gets a little bit clogged up, but you can use dry with the Tokonole. It's just you're going to use a little bit more of it, but if it's what you got, use what you got until you can get some wet sandpaper. So the flattening process, this plane makes such a difference in that. Get this edge nice and sharp, and then all I do is put it down on the surface, have this raised up a little bit, and just run it back and forth a few times after I've hammered the edge, and it just takes a perfect shaving all the way across that edge, gets it nice and flat, perfect for ready to sand. So that's it through 400 wet. So that didn't take that long. So now we're gonna move to 600. Okay, change things up with the angle here. So we're now on to 600. Actually, one thing, side note, when working on the bench, where if you only have one work surface, I keep just a little bit of a squeeze bottle with some diluted like window cleaner. If you're working on one of these mats, just to keep it nice and clean. Sometimes those higher grits kind of put a lot of crap all over the surface, and you don't want your you don't want that marking up your leather. So just keep that nice and clean. So now here we go. We're on to 600. I'm looking for the same thing that I was before, either for a color change or for a noticeable change in the texture of the fibers. And at some point, the fibers actually start getting darker. And I think I've noticed that at 600, the fibers start darkening instead of lightening. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate, but I'm looking at this edge now and it seems like the fibers are getting darker. I don't know. I have a huge massive light right here, so it really helps, but just a little swing lamp or anything like that, get it nice and close so you can see that edge, and then work it in the light so you can see it from different angles. Because if I look like this, the edge looks done. But if I tilt it up so the light is reflecting off of it, I can see right down the middle that it still has some light spots. So I have to keep going. Again, this is what I mean about being super discerning, and I will show you this. Let's see if I can capture what I'm seeing here on this camera. So what we're looking at here is right there. See that white or the lighter strip versus this, how it's nice and dark? That's what I want to get rid of. I want to make sure that's nice and dark. You can also see that edge is starting to get a polish on it. So that's up to 600. I'll keep going dry 600, and then we'll get the Tokonole on there and then wet sand it. So a little bit more here. Yeah, so that's, I'm now hitting that inside part. Okay, so now that is super smooth. So now some Tokonole. It's too much. You want to use, how much Tokonole do you use? Just until the surface has absorbed it. You don't want too much because you don't want to waste it. Because Tokonole is a little pricey. So right there, that was too much. So I wasted a little bit, but you get used to how much you get on there. Again, there's an example of why I don't like just dipping my finger in there. I'd rather have some sort of applicator, which I just have not found a good one yet. So now we're just wet sanding with 600. So there's up to this point, I've all been going in one direction. I'm still doing that to make sure those fibers are consolidated and laid down flat. So there we go, that color now, that's changed. Changes pretty quickly. So I just have this little bit, yeah, this is why I think getting the different angles is so important. I'll zoom in here. If I hold it like this and I'm looking straight, I'm basically looking straight down on it, I can't see any variation. But if I hold the wallet like this, I can see that right down here I haven't hit the edge yet. I don't know if I'll be able to illustrate this on camera. But this whole top edge is done, but down here it's not. You can kind of see it right there. Down here it still needs to be sanded more. There we go. So that is wet sanded to 600. So even that edge, as you can see, that's starting to shine up. It's nice and smooth. So that's wet sanded to 600. Now we go to 1500. So 1500. Still going in one direction. And I haven't taken the burr off. I haven't taken my edge creaser to this yet. And I haven't taken my edge beveler yet. I do that right after sanding to 1500. I find if I use the edge beveler before this, I just end up having to do it again with all the sanding. So I've just gotten into the habit of just waiting to the very end to edge bevel. So there's up to 1500. So that's pretty polished. So now, Tokonole. And then 1500 wet sand. So this dry sand, wet sand combo, it really does get you a really nice clean edge. Prior to this, like I said, I was just going through each grit, Tokonole in between, but then not sanding it with that same grit, but instead going to the canvas cloth. So right now I wouldn't be using 1500, I would have dry sanded 1500 Tokonole canvas. And that doesn't, the problem with that is that it polishes it, but it doesn't continue to sand those fibers down and get them nice and consolidated. Whereas wet sanding the Tokonole, it really helps consolidate those fibers further. And you're not polishing yet, you're still sanding. Polishing comes at the very end after the edge has already been perfected. So there's wet sanded to 1500. So there's wet sanded to 1500. So you can see all those fibers are the same consistency, the same texture. There's no variation. You just watch that whole process. Now let's see if we can get the shine. You can see the polish that's on there. That's kind of a respectable edge as it is. It's just not long lasting because we haven't put the wax edge on it yet. But that looks pretty good. So now we're going to bevel and crease. Here we go. Oh, not really. Hang on. Reposition. Zoom in a little bit. Ugh, that's why it takes so long to film anything. Hang on. Get seated properly. Okay. Edge bevel. Before I go on to the final polishing, I hit the edge with my 1500. So, full strength Tokonole, canvas cloth. I'm not using pressure here, I'm just using, I like using a lot of speed. So my movement's a lot faster than when I was sanding. I don't know why, it just feels better to do it that way. So that is the canvas burnish with the Tokonole. So I think that in itself is, that edge is looking pretty good. It's nice and smooth. We're going to hit that again with the more Tokonole and canvas, and then go onto the wax. So the Tokonole again, just enough canvas cloth. Now we're going to come in with Columbus wax. Now lightly, just rubbing that back and forth onto the edge. I do this probably 2 or 3 times with the canvas. This really helps to go. If you can go quicker, I think it kind of heats the wax up. So I should be showing you the difference here, but it's subtle. So I'm just rubbing the wax on and then trying to burnish that wax in, melt it in almost. Again, this is one of those nail polishing blocks. For me, this is when it really actually starts polishing and getting that reflection. And I hit it again with a little bit more wax. So then taking it beyond this is just more wax, more polishing. Quick review: 200, 400, 600, 1500 grit. Dry sand with those. In between each one of those, we're going with full strength Tokonole and then a wet sand of that same grit. Finishing off with some Columbus wax and your canvas cloth and a polishing stick if you want to go that far with it. So that's my polishing routine as of June 2022. We'll see how much this changes as I work through it to get to even better results. Thank you for watching. There is the Vice Admiral wallet by DS Leather Goods. Coin pouch, 2 card pockets, cash pocket. Made this one out of blue butero. And then whiskey, cognac, and brown butero. So go check out the plans on the Etsy store for the Vice Admiral wallet. It should be available, or probably available by the time I post this. So get over there, download those plans, and have fun with this build. Thank you, Dan, for allowing me to test this wallet out for you. This is a lot of fun. If you guys have any questions about the edge finishing process, find me on Instagram, Justin Star Studio, and message me there if you have any questions, or leave a comment down below. Thank you, Dan, for the tips on the wet sand in. Huge improvement. Go follow him over on Instagram. Go check out my account if you're on Instagram, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks, friends.